Welcome back to Sustaining Creation, a faith journey for small groups. And we're still probably at the stage where you're feeling a little bit of despair because of all we covered in the first couple of sessions. You're wondering, is there any hope for our grandkids? Even though in the last session we talked about the hope that we have because the technology that's advancing is just tremendous. And there's no reason we can't do this other than, well, human will and human behavior. So now in this session, we're going to look at that there's reason for hope because of human behavior, because of things that are happening. So let's go back to our central faith assertion. It comes to us from Psalm 24, and it flatly states, "The earth is the Lord's and all that is in it, the world and those who live in it." It's not ours, it's God's. It's not ours to consume or destroy, it's ours to care for, because God has given it into our care. So why is there reason for hope? Let's start with an old story. You remember the story of Jonah? Yeah, you do. You know how Jonah had God speak to him, saying, "Go at once to Nineveh, that great city, and cry out against it, for their wickedness had come before me." And what does Jonah do? Jonah turns and goes the other way, exactly opposite of going to Nineveh. And we know all the troubles he got in for not doing what God had called him to do. Remember the sea voyage and the tremendous storm that threatened to kill everybody, and so the sailors threw him overboard. And then he's swallowed up by a great big fish. He's in the belly of the beast. And finally, he's puked up on ground, on dry land. He gets up and shakes himself off and finally goes to Nineveh to do what God has called him to do. Where's the hope in that story? Well, I got to tell you, in terms of the climate crisis for decades, the church has been Jonah, going the wrong direction. We have this call from God to awaken the world that the way we're living is destroying God's good creation, and we've gone the other way. You wonder why church isn't relevant to life anymore? Because people can't see any difference between how we live and the rest of the world lives that's destroying the world. So where's the hope? Here's the hope. There are more and more people of faith, like Jonah, picking themselves up off the dry land, shaking off that whale vomit, and heading to Nineveh to tell the powers of this world, to tell the everyday, ordinary human beings that we have to change how we live. And so we were hearing great voices of fantastic faith leaders like Pope Francis with his encyclical, but also the Green Patriarch from the Orthodox Church, but also there's very many climate justice faith leaders speaking out from every faith denomination. Christian, evangelical, Muslim, Hindu, you name it, there's a faith leader speaking out on the need to protect God's good creation. That's where there's hope. That's what we're called to do. We're called to be the voices that make the church relevant to modern life by engaging it purposely in the fight to solve the greatest crisis that humankind has ever experienced. We do this recognizing that the next 10 years are critical. The next 10 years are critical. If we don't turn our society away from the path that it's on in the next 10 years, the game is over. But we have the hope. We have the witness. We have seen time and time again large crowds with strong faith voices rising up to say, we must change. So there's hope. We can do this. God is calling you to do this. So let's go listen to the other voices of wisdom in this segment. And you'll hear God calling. Go to Nineveh. Tell them to change their wicked ways so that our children can live. See you on the road.
This is probably one of the most challenging things because it talks about your daily life being altered. And I would suggest starting with 2 simple practical things to try as a spiritual discipline. Whoever you are, whatever you're listening, turn the cell phone off and put it away. For just one day, just try a day to start without the cell phone at all. And disconnect the TV and the cable for a week. Oh my God, what? No bowl games, no playoff games. What? No Ricky Lake. What are we doing? No YouTube or Netflix. Yeah, that's what I'm suggesting. Unplug and disconnect. And instead of the time you'd spend on those devices, spend them with your family. Spend them in the creation. Spend them in reflection or spiritual discipline, reading. And see if you don't find a richer life. My wife and I, when we first moved to Kalamazoo, Michigan, for the first summer that we were there, we had a beautiful screened-in porch. It wasn't extravagant or elaborate or anything like that. It was just a screened-in porch, a large screened-in porch. And that summer, before kids, we had no television, and we spent every night out on that porch, playing games, talking. And it was one of the most powerful times in my life because I didn't miss any of that other stuff. But I felt one of the strongest and most closest times to my wife because none of that other stuff, I mean, we just had a beautiful time together. And here's the rub. At the end of our days, all of us, this isn't a negative statement, but it's a true statement. And it's going to come off as negative or harsh. But at the end of our time, we're not going to measure the value of our time by how many television episodes we watch or how many movies we saw or how many things we downloaded, as cool as some of that stuff is. But how rich was our life towards each other? And the relationships we have. What do we do with the gift God's given us? I think one of the biggest challenges is, and it's so subtle, but we are lulled to a spiritual sleep and a life-sucking, surface-level existence that God says, that's not abundant living. You're exchanging the joy of life for a facsimile that doesn't even come close. Why would you do that? So, unplug, get off the grid, try it for a day, try it for a week. Just try it. Just experience it, have some discipline, have some willpower. See if that doesn't change your relationship to God and your relationship to your families and the people you care about, and people you don't. You'll begin to see life in a different way, I guarantee it.
What I've been preaching on recently, and that's the scripture in Paul's second letter to Corinthians. At the kind of the climax, Paul is saying, let all that you do be done in love.
And why is that speaking to you?
Because I've come to the place where I think faith communities have potentially the most vital contribution to make in addressing climate change. And that is that we are the possessors of a rich language that fundamentally gets at what motivates people to act. And what motivates people to act are what I call the 3 great loves. A love of others, could be a love of neighbors, a love of God's creation, which often gets manifested in a sense of sacred obligation to a particular location. So we see that right now, obviously, in Standing Rock Reservation, but we see it also in other places. For us, when I was a pastor in Washington, the Columbia River was like kind of the sacred place for a lot of people. So,
what a Gaelic theologian would call a thin spot.
Yeah,
where
definitely.
You can tangibly feel the presence of God.
Right. And then the third great love, and this is what I find is the most common motivator, it's the biggest motivator for me, although it doesn't necessarily work for everybody, but it's a love of children and grandchildren. And so when you think of actual people bringing pictures to rallies and civil disobedience. Right? Jim Antal will go to a civil disobedience with a blown up picture of his grandson.
Oh, yeah.
Just came from North Carolina, one of our leading clergy people down there, Steve Halstead. When he goes to a rally, he brings a picture of his grandson. And for me every day, what motivates me the most is my concern about my 2 daughters and the world they're inherit. And so.
What's the concern?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, is like right now what we're getting a glimpse of the United States. It's just that, a glimpse of what much of the rest of the world is already experiencing, and a glimpse of what we're going to be experiencing on a larger scale in the future. And so I'm concerned about the world they'll inherit. So I've come to the place where I feel like, one of the most fundamental acts of love that a parent or grandparent can have for their child is to do something to address the state of our climate. And I'd also say, what's that?
Why?
Well, I'll put it to you this way, that I believe as a parent that part of my job is to help provide food, shelter, clothing for my children. And along with those things, I believe it's part of my job is to secure a more hospitable, more safe world for my daughters to live in. What fundamentally motivates people, when I look not just at myself, but I look at other people who are active in addressing climate change, and I ask myself, what is motivating them to act? Pretty much almost always it relates to one of those 3 great loves. Mm-hmm. So
3 great loves again are?
Love of others, neighbors both far and near, love of God's creation, and love of children and grandchildren or the generation to come.
The most important thing for me in these Earth Avenger sessions is to help kids make the connections between the choices that they make and the impact on the world. So for example, we'll do a food map. Where I have the kids, we tell a story together, we draw it on a whiteboard about their favorite food and what happened to have to get that food to your plate. To recognize that they have power every day in the choices that they make to change a negative impact into a positive impact. If kids aren't connecting with nature, they're not going to care as much. And they're not going to realize their place in the story of life. So to help them understand the interconnectedness of all beings really helps to foster a sense of awareness and personal responsibility, hopefully. That's the hope. If they think they're separate from nature, then the issues they're hearing about or not hearing about with respect to climate change and environmental degradation, they're not going to care about it. They're not going to think that they have anything to do with it.
Why is it important that they care about it?
Because it's important that they care about it because we need everybody to do what they can to reduce our impacts on the earth, because the earth is suffering. God is sending us signals from across creation about our negative impact, and that we need to change our ways, and that starts with you and me and everybody. At the end of Earth Avenger sessions and the creation care workshops that I do for the confirmation retreats, I always refer back to our charge from God that we have dominion over the earth, and I always make sure to that they understand the definition of dominion as responsibility over, as opposed to power or control over, and that shifts the perspective.
Well, the first magical thing that would happen is that the human tendencies toward greed and hubris would be eradicated from every person on the planet. We would have no more greed and no more pride. And that might change everything. I guess the next thing I would magically change is restoration of the damage that has been done. If we could magically have an earth restored and get a do-over with no pride and no greed, I think this, the experience of humanity would be completely different. So we take away the greed, take away the pride, restore all the damage that's been done. And I guess that makes me wonder for the third thing, what would we do with an earth restored and a more caring humanity? And I guess the third thing is that we would all have awesome music and dance parties every day. We would all get time to be creative and play, and in addition to the everyday work that we do.
Turning to wisdom from writers, for this session, I want to introduce somebody you might not have heard of yet, Kathleen Dean Moore. She's written a great book called Great Tide Rising. She's a moral philosopher, she's an environmental activist, but she's also a grandmother. And in her book, she writes from all three perspectives. It's a great source of wisdom that I keep returning to because she raises a conscious level in me that I have not yet achieved. So let's spend a little bit of time with her words this day. It's morally unjustifiable to take from the world whatever resources we need to protect ourselves from our ongoing recklessness and send the bill to the future in order to fuel the greatest going out of business sale the world has ever seen. She starts off hitting us right between the eyes. It's morally unjustifiable to steal from the future of our kids and grandkids to run the greatest going out of business sale that the world has ever seen. It doesn't get any starker than that. The way we've been living is not sustainable. It's stealing from the future of our kids. Time that we face that. Let's go back to her words. They'll want to know the story of this time, our grandchildren will, this pivotal decade when we either found our way forward or did not. They will give our time a name. It is that important. They will wonder if we saw it coming. They will want to know how hard we really tried to stop the destruction. They will want an accounting. They will want a book filled with the prayers people prayed. They will want jars filled with the last of things. The point is, we are the ones who will create the story of our times. What will it be? Have you ever thought about how our kids and our grandkids will look back on our time and wonder, what did you do when you first realized that the way you live was destroying my future? Will they remember us and bless our memories as people that once we understood took action? Or will they curse us? Because when faced with the greatest crisis that humankind has ever faced, we chose to turn away rather than engage. I can't look at my grandkids and not do this work. I don't think you can either. I don't think you can look at your kids and your grandkids and see a future where they're struggling to live and not do everything in your power this day to change that future to one that's hospitable to life, not one that makes life an ongoing daily crisis. Great words from Kathleen Dean Moore. Her book, Great Tide Rising. Pick it up. It's filled. I've got it all marked up. Pick it up. Use her wisdom to inform your new story in engaging the world to change. I want to raise an uncomfortable subject with us. I want to talk about the need to become a public witness, out in the public square, to leave our sanctuaries, to leave the safety of our church pews and go out in the public square and be the witness for Christ, to be the burning bush, if we want to go to the Old Testament, that sign that awakens our society that we have to change. I'm talking about participating in protests, carrying signs, or just being a presence, and even to the extent of being willing to risk arrest in nonviolent protests. It's time that the church becomes a visible sign to the world that we have to change how we're living, that we have to go to all renewable energy and quit burning that oil, that coal, and that gas. We have to do it with our physical presence. You know, the first time I got arrested, it was in D.C. in front of the White House in response to a call when the first day protesters got arrested and jailed over the weekend, and so we came. Ultimately, over 1,100 of us wound up being arrested. But it was a big step for me. I have to admit, I was uncomfortable doing it. And so I got down there one day ahead of time just to watch how this happened. And I had people coming up and asking me, what's going on? And I would explain. And their comment would be, wow, they look so nice. They're dressed in their Sunday best. How can they be willing to take this risk? How can we be willing to take this risk? It's not without its drawbacks, of course. We made our kids very uncomfortable that the old man with gray hair was out there getting arrested. In fact, our grandkids overheard them talking about it, and the next day at school, our 6-year-old grandson, Dixon, announced to all of his classmates that my grandpa got arrested while my grandma watched. My grandpa got arrested while my grandma watched. The teacher hushed him and said, Dixon, we don't talk about such things. And then when our daughter came up to pick up Dixon, the teacher explained what had happened and then said to our daughter, that must have been very embarrassing for you that things had gotten so bad that your mother had to call the police on your dad. And she says, no, you don't understand. It wasn't like that. They were in Washington, D.C. in front of the White House. He's being arrested for protesting the pipeline. Come, be a visible presence. Even if it caused your adult kids to get embarrassed and your grandkids to wonder, what's going on? Come, be a visible witness. Rabbi Abraham Hessel said that when he was marching protests with Martin Luther King, it was like he was praying with his feet. How much better to do? Get out of the pews, get into the public square, pray with your feet. Be a visible sign, be a burning bush. We have to change, and the church has to lead the way. Come join me. Okay, the action item we're going to focus on today out of the 6, the one I want to specifically focus on, is going to be tough. We're now getting into the category where sometimes people will say, you know what, you're nuts if you think I'm going to do that. But this is where we need to go. What's 27? 27 is challenge your faith community to become a center for climate justice. Be a visible sign in your local community of those 48 steps that we've been going through and more. This is a tough action item. It's a call to be a center for climate justice to your faith community, very much like the call back in the 1800s to be a church that was against slavery. It's that kind of a critical justice issue. And so it's going to be unpopular. You're going to have pushback. You might even risk losing some major donors. People are going to threaten to pull their money out because they're heavily invested in fossil fuels. But you know, if it's wrong to destroy the earth, it's wrong to profit from that destruction. And so you're going to have to risk it. Why? In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus has a very discomforting passage on what it means to be a follower of him. He says this, Then Jesus told his disciples, if any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit them if they gain the whole world but forfeit their life? Or what will they give in return for their life? It's not easy to follow the way of Jesus. When faced with the greatest crisis that humankind has ever faced, that threatens the very existence of future generations, the church must be a prophetic voice, and that's the challenge. I know at this point in time you've been getting the message. If you're still with us at this point in time, you're starting to understand that this is what God is calling you to do. It's not a one-off. It's not a one and done. This is a forever path. that you need to challenge your church to be fully engaged in? Can you do it? Yeah. Is it going to be scary? Yeah. Are you going to be threatened because of it? Yeah. It's going to be like the early disciples having to decide whether they're going to stay in the safety of the upper room or risk going out to be criticized, to be hurt, to be killed in order to follow the way of Jesus. That's our challenge. Yeah, it's a tough one. Some will say, I'm nuts for saying that, well, you must do it. But if you're honest, you'll hear God calling you this way. Go, challenge your faith community to become a climate justice center, a voice in the wilderness, calling for a way rooted in love and compassion so that future generations can live. You can do it. You got Jesus. You got the Spirit. God is on our side. So that wraps up our video session for today. What's up next is for your discussion. That's every bit as important, if not more important, than all that we laid out before you. So gather together as a group. Spend some time with the Scripture, but give yourself lots of time to dialogue about what you've seen and what you've heard, what has touched you, what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. Take the time to listen very deeply to the wisdom each other shares. You never know when God is going to speak using another person's voice to give you a truth that you do not yet have. And then last but not least, in your discussion group, spend time with the 6 action items that we have in today's handout sheet. Until next time, enjoy the journey. I'm your host, Rev Dr. Terry Gallagher. See you further along the way.